Shawn Rochester. I'm the CEO of Good Steward LLC, as well as a couple of other companies.
Hey, it's Kellen, and today on Diversified Game, I have Shawn Rochester, and he is the founder of Good Steward. And this is a book. He has courses. He's also does some other companies. We'll see what we can get out of him, and all of his things. He might be the one who's going to take over Alibaba now that Jack Ma has been silenced. Who knows? But Shawn, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Great to be on with you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm happy to have the conversation, and thank you for coming on. If you could lead us into what your company is doing and what the blacktax.com, all the links will be in the description box, folks, what that is all about.
So we're engaged in aspects of trying to help close the wealth gap. So there are portions of the company that work with kind of what we call personal financial management, which is how to handle, manage, and grow your limited resources to be able to drive, cash flow, eliminate debt, kind of leave a legacy for your children's children. Another aspect is really focused on how do we ensure that we are placing capital with Black businesses to the extent that we can assist with that. Driving contracts, as well as educating people about the economic impact of, creating jobs, business, and providing capital in affordable and accessible ways across the greater Black community.
So are you actually after a two-term Obama presidency and one of the greatest presidents in the world, Trump, saying that Black people aren't being treated fair? Shawn, I'm trying to throw you off doing my best Jesse Lee Peterson impression, but the Blacks, but no, tell us, for those who might feel like a Jesse Lee Peterson, or that things are all fair and this is, America after we've, got Juneteenth as a national holiday and that's all we need. Tell us, where is the Black community as a whole? What is, lacking and what the solution is?
Yeah, so really big questions. So we can, Black community owns about 2% of U.S. wealth. We're missing about 1.4 million jobs, 1.4 million businesses with employees. Most people don't realize, but there's 2.56 million or so Black businesses. Only 4% of them are large enough to have employees. That 4% generates about 70% of all the revenues, right, from Black business. Employs about 1 million people. It's about 109, maybe 110,000 of those companies, but we're missing about 1.4 million of those. And pre-COVID, we're already missing 6 million, jobs associated, with that across the broader, Black community. But then, of course, you have the enormity of the gap in wealth, or the wealth gap that people kind of talk about, which is about $841,000 with respect to the mean Black family wealth relative to mean white family wealth. If you apply that across 17 million households, it's about $14 trillion is the size of the gap. So those gaps in jobs, business, and capital and wealth, right, obviously drive about almost all the socioeconomic problems, that we see today and that we, experienced broadly in the past.
Okay, so we have, the lack, and we have, now COVID and things are opening up. There are certain jobs that have, always been in need. I mean, there's a 2 million plus nursing shortage. What do we need to do as a people to, get in the gap? Because if even 100,000 of us, got jobs, nursing jobs at 60,000, average, which isn't a bad salary, but it's surely not the peak for just your regular RN. We'd be looking at over 6 billion in a community. So can we not go get those jobs? Are those jobs being denied us, or, does it start somewhere different, because I want you to give the audience, your solution, so they go grab your book and the courses and say, it's not just the complaining, this is the solution.
Yeah, so the solution is under a framework that I call PhD. And that framework stands for purchase, hire, and deposit in ways that create jobs, create and expand business, and provide capital in the Black community. That framework, right, is directly stimulative to job creation, business formation and expansion, and capital availability and affordability, right? So when you start to talk about closing these various gaps, there's a number of things that you have to discuss, right? One of the things that we have to discuss is there are actually very high levels of anti-Black bias, right? That have a distorting impact on commerce. They have a distorting impact on hiring, on advancing, on promotions, and a whole host of things, right? And it's in almost very few people even take this into consideration when they're coming up with their plans and policies and programs. So what do I mean by really high levels of anti-Black bias? So if you go back to like a study that was done in 2012, they looked at anti-Black bias across the American electorate. So, you had a ton of organizations, the Associated Press, you had Michigan and Chicago, Stanford, a bunch of different, institutions involved in that. And what they found was, from a conscious bias perspective, like, exactly what you're doing, the levels was about 51%. That's 1 and 2, right? In terms of unconscious or implicit, like you don't mean to, but you're still having this impact, anti-Black bias impact, it's about 56%, almost 6 and 10. Those are really, really high levels, and that's across the American, electorate. And if you look at work done by Harvard, they have something called an implicit association test, or the IAT test. It's free. You could take it online, right? You can just kind of, Google it and take it. And it's a great way of teasing out implicit or unconscious bias. Short version is, for the millions and millions and millions of people who've taken that test, on average, it tends to be about a 75%. They actually call it automatic white preference, which is a wonderful way of characterizing anti-Black bias. So about 75% of people who take that test have automatic white preference. If you look inside the category of those folks who are just white, it's about 85%. An automatic white preference, they say empirically, can lead to discriminatory, behavior. So the levels of biases are quite high, right? So that's going to show up in, a number of things I talk about in the book in terms of, high-end careers and promotion, and how people evaluate your work product, and a bunch of different things. So that's going to show up in the healthcare industry, and it obviously does, right? In terms of the quality of care and the way the care is addressed. So you have that aspect of it, but then you also have the aspect of, do millions of our young people know about the possibilities of nursing, as an example, right? You kind of brought that up. There's also software, right? Engineering, where there's $100,000 gap in terms of, Black, software engineers. Do our young people even kind of know that these careers exist, right? And it's very hard for them to know when you have significant numbers of Black families that are living in either deep poverty or close to poverty, right? And they don't have these folks in their ecosystems, and then have investments been made, right, from K through 12 to university, to help shepherd people and guide people along the route of developing the skill set to be able to fill these positions, right? And do we have offtake partners that are ready to employ those folks as those skill sets, right, have been developed and are met? It's a full kind of ecosystem approach that needs to be employed to be able to close these gaps, not just saying, hey, these jobs are missing, and Black people should just do it. You have to invest, right, in the pathways that actually lead to those outcomes.
And who should invest? Because you'll hear folks say, invest in yourself. And that, my wife and I went to HBCU, actually went to the Harvard of the South, HBCU, Grambling State University. We have to throw it out like that. But you see so many people doing arts, and where the science department is saying we have scholarships. And, that's across the board, not just at HBCUs. So how do we, tell our kids, or some of those who have grandkids to say, stop going for liberal arts, stop going for leisure studies. You yourself have some serious degrees from some serious universities that, finance. What can we do to lead ourselves? Because we can't expect the government, because it's really not their position in any government globally to say, unless you're Cuba, right? Or somewhere, that's dictating this is what you guys are going to do. What can we do as a community? Because I want to put it on us first, extreme ownership. What can we do to say we're going to train our kids to do these things for jobs that are actually will hire them?
Yeah, so I think there needs to be kind of balance in that kind of framework. Be very careful about extreme ownership when you on average have 2% of US wealth, right? And all of these outcomes that you're talking about are directly proportional to wealth levels. So, you have an ecosystem effect. First, there's like the environmental effect, which is in your household, in your area, in your community, what are the things that you believe and value, and how are those things kind of propagated, right? You got to talk about it in your household. You have to talk about it in the community. The norms may not be focused on STEM related things in communities that are kind of deeply impoverished, right? Or dealing with all kinds of stressors where it's not the natural flow. You don't see these people, you don't talk to them, very, very frequently. Your extended family may not be comprised of these individuals. So you need to have something that's dedicated that gets to make you aware of this, where other communities, have that, happening more naturally, right? You have to have a continued emphasis and focus on, kind of high growth, high earning, careers. And we're tasking people who haven't had that experience and have really been precluded from it from past discriminatory behavior that was actually government sponsored. You know what I mean? So the solution is different for where you are along the social strata, right? If you look at kind of, wealthier, African Americans, you're going to see that that's less the case. There's much more folks that are going to be leaning towards STEM because you have, more people that are in it, and it's a kind of a focus area, and folks have the resources to spend more, right? The well-to-do spend 9 times more on education with their children than those that don't have the resources, even if the desire, right, is the same. So we do have to have, the responsibility as families, but it's hard to talk about what you don't know about, right? I went all the way through university, and I never knew about investment banking, right? I never heard about, Goldman Sachs. I never heard about McKinsey and Company. And I was young, I was hungry, but you can't kind of do what you don't know. So part of it is informing people on a continual basis. The other part of it is ensuring that the gaps can be bridged. In well-to-do communities, you can send your kids off to STEM camps, right? They can go to universities. They can spend time, with relatives. The school system may have it already embedded into it, because the school system is funded by property values, which got augmented by government investment, right? From late early 30s, right, up until late 60s. So there's a lot that kind of needs to be done. It's an ecosystem approach to help bridge those gaps. We certainly do need to have ownership, and there's no question about that. I think responsibility has always been placed on Black people, but there is the role of environment, and there is the role of resources. And you can have great plans and desires, but if you have limited resources, your ability to execute those plans, right, are extraordinarily difficult.
And so I like that, because it's solution based. It's like if you're having a problem with your iPhone and it's causing a problem in your relationship, throw out the iPhone. Cynthia and other folks, they'll tell you that.
And if you can buy a new one, it's not a problem, right? But if you can't, now we got to find some workarounds, right? Now we're dealing with inefficiencies. Now we're missing important calls, right? Now we're getting a gap between desire, right, and opportunity, and properly executing and stuff like that. That's a lot of noise that can be economically quite damaging.
It definitely could, but I'm old enough, and you may be too, to remember when we didn't have these fancy gadgets, right? And we keep making our lives quicker, but also making them more complicated. Some may say. I kind of love technology, so I might go argue that. What can a parent do right now? Because someone like yourself, who, your PhD method, the purchase, hire, and deposit method, what got you to go to some of these great schools and great programs? What was done differently for you, so folks can have a blueprint to say, okay, do they need to go to this school, or will, the free school in our city work until my child, the junior college, they get enough credits? Like, what made you stand out?
So let me kind of talk about two things. I'll talk a little bit about my situation, but then in general, right? So you want to go to the highest quality opportunity at the lowest cost, right? No matter what that is. And you can take like a junior college route all the way through, and that can be extremely economically efficient to do that, right? The cost is relatively low. There's Pell Grants and things like that that will offset that cost. But wherever you go and whatever you do, you have to perform at the highest levels, right? Because performance gets funded. Mediocrity gets the privilege of borrowing. You know what I mean? So that's non-negotiable at that point, right? So if you take that path, you can do exceptionally well. And there's many people who kind of do that. I'm fortunate in that, I'm originally from Barbados, right? And I went to school, public school system in New York City, elementary school. And after that, I actually went back to Barbados and stayed there. It wasn't the plan. I just kind of liked it because, things can go sideways real quick in the city, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Where you don't have that kind of energy, down there. And I stayed, and I got put in to this great school called the Commermere School that I could have really never gotten into. So I'm kind of like a walking experiment, the same kid in two different environments, very different outcomes. So pretty much just like the typical kid in New York City, it was behind on everything, the state test scores and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't being a rebel. Like, nobody did homework. It wasn't a statement that you were making. It's just kind of how it was. But when I was in Barbados, it's just a totally different environment. Very, very rigorous. Everything is based on tremendously high regards of respect. You don't get credit for showing up. You don't get credit for anything. You just had to perform. And it took me a while to adjust, and I began to kind of rise to that level. So I got a really great foundational education there, right? It's kind of like when people kind of send their kid to live with, a relative someplace else, right? In a kind of a stronger school district, and they get the opportunity to become part of that environment and then to expand, right, according to the environment. So I got my kind of formative education there. So I was used to this concept of Black excellence. That was normal for me, right? Like everybody was. The troublemakers were smart. The athletes were smart. You know what I mean? The social cool people were smart. There was no kind of distinction. You could be smart and all these kind of other things. So that was great for me. That was the foundation. So when I came back here, it was easier to kind of propel and maintain that, right? And then the work, honestly, here was just a lot less rigorous, right? So I didn't even have to work as hard, to do as well. But that's less me. Like, it's not because I'm special. I'm some super duper person. I'm not, right? There were a ton of folks there that were really, really smart, right? What they didn't have was the opportunity to come back to this land of opportunity and to be able to deploy, all that they learned, right? So I'm a big proponent of, we got to create new environments for these young people to be in, right? You can't take them out of trauma for 6.5 hours when they go to school. And sometimes they're not out of trauma in some of these schools, and then put them back into that situation. They need to be exposed to high quality levels of education and an environment that is conducive and supportive, of that. So we can see the true benefit, right? What they can actually do. We are not seeing what our young people can actually do. We're just seeing a product of the environments that they're coming from.
Well, I love the international aspect, because immigrants keep this country rolling from every level, top to bottom, from it. And that's what America is an experiment. We hear so often people say, coming from another country, how more serious the education was somewhere else. but I know you focused on a lot on, the Caribbean, even Africa. Can you talk about what you do to build that bridge, as well as the community give back that you are doing or that you plan on doing in the future for the communities that you serve?
Yeah. So, when the PhD framework, right, is all about creating jobs, business, and capital here, right? We need to do more business with our businesses, and we need to encourage others from other communities to do more business with our businesses so that it stimulates hiring, right, which is incremental spending, so that it attracts capital, so that we're creating wealth, right? We need to do that without question here. And we're not doing a good job by any stretch of the imagination. That same thing needs to happen across the diaspora, right? Across the ecosystem. We need to be doing business, in the Central and South America and across and on the continent, right? Across all of us, so that we're actually creating jobs, right? And creating and expanding businesses and providing capital all across these ponds, right? We need to have stimulative job creating activity in all of these different areas, and doing commerce, right, is the tip of the spear to be able to drive that, right? So we're always engaged in, working with other businesses or individuals that are doing business, right, across the various, I call it across the pond, right? So to speak. There's a lot that we need to do to bring awareness to people, because we tend to see each other through European eyes. Like, people don't really realize the level of development that's occurred, across the continent, right? And they kind of see it as famine and war and risk and all that kind of stuff, and not cities and opportunities, and that people from every other place in the world are there, doing business, right? And there are opportunities in the Caribbean, right, as well. So it's important to educate people about these things, and then to make connections so that you're lining up folks who have the capital with folks who have the execution prowess, and with folks who have the opportunities, right? Because it creates jobs for everyone. And I'm all about expanding, the pie. In terms of, how to make a difference. We've always been very, very engaged in our community. Like, my wife and I were part of a nonprofit that, over the course of our tenure with them, gave out over $2 million, right, of scholarship money to Black high school students that were going off to university, right? So we're always engaged in kind of living the practices and living the principles. So when possible, where possible, on your own account, on your business account, the influence that you have with your universities, with your elected officials, and nonprofits that you're a part of, make sure that we are doing business with high quality, Black service providers, right? To the fullest extent. So those are things that we practice on our own account, and that we encourage as part of, doing business. And I obviously, do lots of different talks at various corporations, and kind of encourage this behavior and activity, as well as, other, institutions.
Now, for those who do have, some extra money, and this is kind of I write courses on this for people, how to travel to Africa. I think that more of us, especially if you have, some type of savings, you go visit Africa, connect, do your DNA if you so choose, and you can see, like with geo arbitrage, how you can live like a king for, $2,000-3,000 a month in most of, the rest of the world, especially on the continent in the 54, and counting countries. What do you think about folks who say, I'm tired of the racism? I'm tired. I don't want to fight my whole life. I actually want to enjoy it. So going to Barbados, going to Jamaica, going to Cameroon, Kenya, that's going to help my mind and my pocket. Is that something that you could see in the near future for, another revolution, and saying, we're tired, we're out of here, which is kind of a horror movie to many Americans, because, you so much talent would leave, but we're seeing it little by little, people saying, I'm tired.
Yeah, I mean, there are people certainly that are going, overseas, whether it's either permanently or, buying some property, engaging in business and exploring those opportunities. I think those are great things from a commercial aspect. And we need to have more of that happening, right? There is not enough commerce that's being done across the continent at any level, right? The country is not doing enough by any stretch of the imagination, and certainly the individuals, aren't. But at the end of the day, no matter what you are trying to do, you got to make sure the fundamentals are in place, right? Which is, are you operating your personal and business affairs in a way, such a way to drive cash flow? Because if you don't have positive cash flow, the conversation is done. There's no college, there's no home, there's no travel, there's no anything, right? You got to make sure that we're in that position. Are we operating in such a way where we are eliminating kind of debt from our personal account, or at least making it significantly more manageable than the levels that we wind up, having? And are we putting ourselves in a position where we're going to have enough assets, right, at retirement and in the future? Your travels to other places should be part of that larger plan, because that has to be funded, right? People sometimes don't realize that if you decide to go someplace new, that's great. How are you going to live there? Where is your base of income going to come from, right? Is it coming from some type of job or service that you're providing? Is it coming from a business that you are engaged in? Or are you just drawing down resources, right? Because you're spending and not kind of earning income. These things need to be thought about deeply, so you have the resources to actually go wherever it is that you want to go, to be able to have the home, to invest in a business, kind of invest in the folks that are there, so you can have a life and a lifestyle that maintains you and your family. It could be at a lower cost structure, right? But that really needs to be thought through well, right? So we just don't over romanticize the situation and then wind up broke, right? There's a lot of people who love to travel. I think it's great. Is it consistent with your budget, right?
Definitely.
Right? You're engaged in an unsustainable kind of practice. So those fundamentals that I call soul, stewardship, ownership, and legacy, they have to be in place regardless of what you do. And it becomes an enabler of the things that you now want to invest in and augment. And if that's, setting up shop in a different country, then more power to the person.
And having a connection to Barbados, what would you say with, folks love to romanticize. Chris Rock had a great joke about how Americans go to Jamaica, pass through the worst poverty they've never seen before, go to a resort, come back to America and say, hey, Jamaica is beautiful, right? Because they never get off the resort. What would you say is a healthy budget for those who are thinking it's time for me to go explore and take, some of my savings? What are the things that you would say look out for, because you don't want to run out of money? And that would be embarrassing. I've had it happen as a single person. I couldn't have it happen as a married with kids. But, what would your advice be to someone thinking like that?
Yeah, it's the same. You got to have the stewardship, ownership, legacy. I call that soul, right? You have to have that in place. A lot of things are math problems, right? So you got to break out the spreadsheet or your kind of notepad and figure out what the costs and expense are to the best of your ability, to make sure that you're in a positive cash flow situation no matter where you're going. The other thing is you really do need to have some relationships on the ground, right? Some people who can help you really think through, where to live and how to interact and how things work, and the cultural adjustments that you need to get familiar with. And of course, what are you going to do with respect to healthcare, education, a number of different things that's important to really think through, so you're really well prepared, right? And relationships in countries and places where you're not from is golden, right? I mean, you can just go and kind of set things up. But if you can form some relationships with people who can help you get up that curve faster, so you can be more successful, then that's absolute. Then the other mindset that I have is, you need to have enough resources to engage, right, and invest in, the people, in the community. I always feel like, people should be happy that you're there and not indifferent to it, right? And you do that by making sure that your presence is having an economic effect, right, for those folks that are around there.
Love that. And I love that one of your courses, I'm actually writing a course on, how to be debt free. But there's so much that you can learn from people, even on the same topic. It's like the scriptures, different pastor can tell you something deeper and go deeper with it. With the debt free, what do you think is the number one debt that is holding back the Black community in America?
Oh man, we'll talk about some of the debts, but it's more than just the debts, right? Um, you of course have the cost of education, which has skyrocketed over the last 40 years. I mean, I think the numbers was something like, 40 years ago, you could probably went to Yale for like five, six, $7,000. You know what I mean? Now you're talking 70,000 if you get if you're fortunate, right? If you go to some of these, private schools. So the cost of education has obviously skyrocketed, and it's burdened young people with extraordinary levels of debt. Then you have, you have the cost of acquiring a car, right? And which is a massively depreciating asset, but it sends out such strong social cues about kind of who you are, and you get all this, feedback, right, from folks that tempts you to purchase more than you might otherwise be able to afford. Obviously, even being blessed to be in a position we have the resources to purchase a home, right? Home ownership is really expensive, right? You have all the operating costs associated with it and things that can go wrong. And then, of course, depending on where you live, you might not have the appreciation over time. And predominantly Black communities tend to have 18% less, appreciation on the equity of their homes, all things being the same. So you've got a debt-fueled society, but then you've got people who are not starting with intergenerational wealth transfers or inheritance, right? So your buckets are empty. Like, you have to fill the bucket in your particular generation while acquiring all of these things and accumulating the debt to do it. So it's extremely difficult, right? It's very difficult even for folks who are not Black, but when you are, in the Black community and collectively owning 2% of U.S. wealth, and having, $200 of disposable income. I mean, these things become, extraordinarily difficult for the kind of the average person, which is why we have to have a total focus on what I call stewardship, ownership, and legacy. When it comes to education, high performance is really critical because you'll get funded for that. It's easy for me to say perform well, right? That's very, very difficult to do if you don't have the resources, right? And if you don't have an environment to support that. But you will be scholarshiped, right, if you perform, exceptionally well. And that's one huge way of reducing your educational costs, right? And then, of course, as you mentioned rightly before, when you start thinking about higher compensation careers like STEM and the like, choosing those can add $2 to $4 million to your lifetime earnings. So the choice of career on top of that is really, really, critical, and it puts you in a position to have more flexibility to either start your own business or perhaps pool some resources and invest alongside, some of your friends and colleagues and the like.
Well, I really appreciate this talk, and I want the folks to make sure they go to your website. You guys, links will be in the description. He also has a YouTube. If you Google his name or YouTube his name, you'll see he spoke at, Google. That video has over 1.2 million. I hope they gave him some money for that video. That's considered viral. And, he's done it at universities. So I appreciate you. Anything you want to leave the people with, Shawn?
Yeah, I just, thank you for having the conversation and for engaging in it, and for allowing your audience to take part in it. The things that we do, like as a people, like we Black people, we spend less than 2% of our own income on our own businesses, right? That is unsustainable. When possible, where possible, let's utilize high quality Black service providers. It's not just t-shirts, it's not just restaurants, it's not just other things like that. I'm talking about cars, I'm talking about realtors, I'm talking about insurance agents, I'm talking about general contractors, plumbers, electricians, really, really terrific wealth managers, accountants, lawyers. When possible, where possible, let's make sure we're utilizing our high quality service providers and encouraging other people in our ecosystem to do the same. We got to lead with economics, right? We got to have an impact on jobs, business, and capital. And not only do we need to have more high quality jobs, that's great for earned income, but we have to apply this idea of soul, stewardship, ownership, and legacy so we can turn that earned income into retained income. So that's the first step in wealth accumulation.
Awesome. Well, you guys have gotten the game. I want to take this off air so I can thank Shawn again and his great publicist, Cynthia Nacio Pinto, so we can talk about maybe some other dates with some clients of ours. Yes, I'm a publicist who loves PR folks, so we can all talk. So you guys, make sure you like, share, subscribe. Be blessed.